Welcome to another exciting mystery solving video. In this one, I'm going to solve and explain the mystery of the Moai of Easter Island. Before we can understand and solve any mystery, we must first understand what the mystery is. Back in the year 1722, 3 ships come sailing along, and they discovered this Easter Island. It's admiraled by Jacobus Roggeveen from the Dutch West India Company. It's actually 304 years ago. And they discover this island. Now, around this island is these great big Moai, and some of them are 30 to 70 feet tall. Some of them are balancing these big red hats. Many of them you can see are not standing on walls or podiums. Most of them are tossed and turned and facing away from the volcano. Why are they facing away from the volcano? Because the volcano is part of the mystery. Most of them are buried, they face down, fallen and broken. There is so many of these Moai that some of them are even lying in the sea. And around Easter Island you even get these black fish. In other words, everything here is black and burnt. Even the ones standing on the walls are all black and burnt. It's like something has cooked them. And they're standing with this pose with their fingers on their bellies. A bit like you after a big meal. These are not solid stone walls. These are made up of loose material, loose rock. It's like they are capable of being shaken. And there's this balancing act with their hat. So what is this about? You can see how they're made up of loosely put together rock. And it's all part of the mystery we're going to solve. Recently, an expedition discovered that you have to tilt the body 15 degrees forward to put the hat on. Otherwise, the hat does not lock on. And some people state that these Moai sculptures, you can actually walk them. There's always been this freshwater idea, design behind this island. And people have found these RongoRongo tablets. These little tablets have been studied by some of the world's best decoders, decipherers, translators. And they all come together with the same conclusion, that whatever language this is in, it cannot be decoded. It cannot be deciphered. All the other Polynesian islands had dogs, but Easter Island is the only island with no dogs. In fact, the only animals they ever recorded there was chickens and rats. It's like the place is covered with food. There is a very interesting fish that only swims and found in this area of the world around Easter Island, and that is this trumpetfish. This elongated, funny looking trumpetfish that changes color, and it's the only fish that can swim both and breathe both horizontally and vertically. So we're going to study this fish at the end of this video to solve its mystery too. And it's not the only fish that's strange in this area, because if you travel east of Easter Island, under the water, recently they've discovered this abundance of life and sea creatures.
Diversidad que existe en estos montes submarinos para tener también una idea de con cuánta riqueza también contamos.
And this is part of the mystery. I'll share with you a link where you can find this video from the scientists that have been out there and studied and found all this new species of life and creatures, because it is part of the greater scheme of things.
So yeah, it's really cool. Así que probablemente.
Otherwise, if you look on land, the only sculptures that are different is this one. They call him the Kneeling Moai. So what does all this have to do with volcanoes? How are they part of this theme that's going on here? Sculptures are blown down, blown off the wall. And you can see how the wall has a red tip and the hats are red. And this guy here has white eyes and he's red in the face. And you can see how all the stone and rock is all burnt and black. So what is the theme that all this is building us towards? Moses receiving the law from God. Moses going up Mount Sinai, meeting with God and receiving the law and placing it in the Ark of the Covenant. And the Israelites got a little bit shaken and cooked. There in the book of Exodus it says Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Now this is the official measurements that UNESCO World Heritage Site has provided, and also the Chilean Navy. And I've also taken some borderline measurements from all the sites around Easter Island, and I've measured them out to be this. So when you put it all together, what is it telling us? Well, 164 is let there be light, and the teacher, and 60 aligns with the 60 myriads that Israelite men Moses led during the Exodus. 11, there's an 11-day journey between Mount Horeb and Kadesh, which is captured in Deuteronomy 1 verse 2. The 48 square nautical miles, as in the surface area, lines us up with the Levitical cities Moses commanded to establish for the priesthood. 6666, the 4 sixes is an interesting measurement because 66 is wheel. There was this Gilgal in Hebrew where 12 stones representing the tribes were placed after Moses. Now let's consider the Ark of the Covenant, where Moses placed the 10 Commandments, the law from God. It is 2.5 cubits by 1.5 by 1.5. If you measure the difference with Noah's Ark was exactly 120 times the length, and the volume was 80,000 times. Now, this has its own theme, but right now we're going to focus on the Ark of the Covenant's measurements and how it relates to Easter Island. The first thing we need to do is let's look at Easter Island on the globe as a global position on the Earth. Right, so this is planet Earth. Do you know what this position on the Earth is? That is meridian 0. That is where x0, y0 on the Earth is. Now, if you rotate the Earth 109 out of the 360, 109 degrees west, and you travel south 27, there is Easter Island down here. So if you zoom in, zoom down here. If you right-click anywhere on the island, you'll see it has minus 27, minus 109. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Let's switch off the view. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, if we had to take that distance, and we look at the Earth from the top down. If you take out your calculator, right, and you say 360 minus 109 point, what was it, 33 something? There is your 2.5 cubits numerically. And if you multiply that by 60 to convert to arc minutes, there is your 1.5 cubit numerical alignment with the Ark of the Covenant. Now, you might say to me, oh, isn't those two numbers in the moon? Because the moon is exactly 109 times its size and distance from the Earth, in average. And the moon is also 27% the size of the Earth. That's right, that will be well observed. The kneeling Moai, if you plot the same position on the moon, you find an interesting location because it is exactly between the inner and outer ring on the moon of this one-of-a-kind, unique crater on the moon called Mare Oriental. This guy would be positioned right on a point where half the year he's in sunlight and the other half of the year he's in the dark. So what's going on with that? Now you have to wait for an upcoming video to see what that's got to do with Easter Island. Now cast your mind on the Ark of the Covenant that Moses was commanded by God to make. In the Holy Bible, there is a number of different cubit measurements. Basically, what happened over time, it was changed for different thematic reasons. Now, the earliest form of cubit was known as the short cubit. If you convert the 2.5 cubits into meters using the short cubit, It is exactly 1.09 meters. Why is that? There is a thematic reason why the Ark of the Covenant would be measured in short cubits and not the other cubits, because the earliest 6 handbreadths has this 6 days of labor and creation, a threshold for the Sabbath. There's Isaiah 6 and the seraphim around the throne. And Ark in Hebrew is 257. 257 can be found by a number of site measurements, but we're going to get into the site measurements in a little bit. Now, consider the Ark of the Covenant to have a decimal ratio. It calculates to 1.666666. Now, if you consider the golden ratio, which is 1.618, the difference between the Ark of the Covenant and the golden ratio is exactly 0.018. 18 is a number to overcome sin, Satan, and evil. If you consider the Ark of the Covenant's ratio, 2.5 divided by 1.5, and you look at it like a fraction instead of a decimal, but you look at it in a fraction, you get 5/3. So 5/3. Now, Genesis 5:3, that is the 109th passage in the Bible. And other passages like Chronicles 35:3, there it says, put the holy ark in the house. And other passages that also have a 5:3 ratio, like Exodus 25:16, there it says, and thou shalt put into the ark the testimony which I shall give thee. If you take 109 and you divide it by 27, you get 4.04. 404 is the Hebrew number for the word holy. And 27 is the Hebrew number for the meaning of God's work, the work of God. What else I found interesting is that if you take the volume of the Ark of the Covenant, if you calculate the volume in cubits, 65.4, and you divide that by 27, you get 2.424. The 2424th verse in the Bible is this one. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all kinds of skills. So there's an example of how God is creating a box to put something in. Goodness, greatness. In Deuteronomy 10:9, that speaks of the guardians of the Ark of the Covenant. If we plot the location on Easter Island of the 3 volcanoes, Taravaka, Poiki, and Reino Kai, we get this measurement here where if you calculate the center of that triangle, you get these 3 measurements here, 330, 237 degrees, and 62 degrees. Now that there has a law being crossed, or transgression, presence sought, meditation, and judgment applied, or separation. There's a little diagrammatic view of the theme of how Easter Island is producing and how it's parallel with the Ark of the Covenant story in the Holy Bible. If you plot, this is the Earth now, this is the North Pole, that's the center of the Earth, South Pole is down here, and this is Easter Island on the Earth's circumference. Now if you measure the distance over the Earth to the North Pole and Easter Island, you get 8092. Now, Salias Gomez, the area just east under the ocean of Easter Island, where there's this abundance of sea life, that has a surface arc distance of 8,080 miles. 8080 is an interesting number because Moses, when he receives the first tablets, he stays 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai. Then when he receives the second set of tablets, he sits on Mount Sinai for another 40 days and 40 nights. So 40 and 40 plus 40 and 40 is 8080. If we consider the halfway point between Easter Island and the North Pole, and you draw a line from that point to the Earth's surface, you get this measurement here of 6666348 cubits. We've seen that measurement before with the UNESCO World Heritage Site confirming the surface area. And there it is again, measured to the North Pole, the Sagitta measurement. Now H, the Hebrew number 6666, means righteousness and justice. And that was the whole purpose of the Ark of the Covenant. If you take the Ark surface distance between Easter Island and the North Pole, and you subtract the straight through the Earth distance, you get 2151 kilometers, 2,151 kilometers as basically the surplus. Now, do you see how 2151 matches the 2.5 by 1.5 arc's dimensions? Now, if we take that exact same measurement with the South Pole, between Easter Island and the South Pole, and you subtract the cordial distance, the straight through the Earth distance, you get a remainder of exactly 345 kilometers. 345 is the Hebrew number for the word or name Moses. The surface distance in nautical miles is 3,775. Why that's interesting is because that is the sum of 2,000 and 1,775. 2,000 is the distance that the normal Israelites had to stay away from the ark, and 1,775 is the cost in shekels for the hooks and the fittings of the tabernacle. There are some other interesting measurements like 505 nautical miles, and that has an alignment with Kohath. Kohath was the second son of Levi and the grandfather of Moses, Aaron and Miriam. If we think of the Ark of the Covenant's home, the tabernacle, the excess divided by 2 is 172.8 something. That rounds to 173. 173 is the Hebrew number for tent of a high place. If we look at Easter Island's measurement of 8092, that is 5,000 times pi. 5,001 exactly times pi is 8092. So what is that saying? That's saying that it has a difference between a perfect geometric fit of 0.42. Now 42, that's the number of stations Moses traveled through the wilderness. These are all the station stops, 42. So if we sum this together, we have 8092 is the Hebrew number for the word hearing, hear. And that's what God did. He heard the cry of his people. Then we have 2:20:1 ratio. And 20:1 is the Exodus chapter and verse where God begins the whole 10 Commandment story. Then in Exodus 25:8, which brings us from 2,152 kilometers, let them make me a sanctuary. If you look down on the earth between Easter Island and Meridian 0, it is exactly 30% of the world, and the backside is 70%. Just to demonstrate that, if you look between Meridian and, so this portion of the earth here, this portion is exactly 30.4%. So 30 and 70, you got this 30-70 ratio here. Why is that? 70 is the ordered people, the side of the covenant, and 30 is the holy service. We could also look at it as Numbers 3 verse 7, and there it speaks of the people who are to perform duties in the tabernacle, like the Levites that had to carry the Ark of the Covenant. If we consider the coordinates of Easter Island roughly in the middle, we also have this summing where we can lead us to 40 years in the wilderness. 20 and 20 is 40. We also have this 7:2 where it speaks of, thou shalt speak all that I command thee, that ye shall not sin. Get up and see the promised land. So it's all about commission, departure, law and testing, and the transition into God's people's inheritance, which was Israel. If we look at the angle between Easter Island and the North Pole, we get 117. Now 117 in the Bible, it has this theme going on, like where Jonah 1 verse 17, this is where Lord prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. So it's all about God creating this box, he marks the holy boundary, sets what belongs to him in its appointed place, and prepares a container. In Psalm 117, it speaks of the Lord's truth endure forever. Now, 117 also brings us out to this passage where it says, but among the Israelites not a dog will bark. Now that draws a parallel with the fact that there's no dogs on this island, only chickens and rats. And there were dogs recorded on all the other Polynesian islands. Easter Island is the only island that had no dogs. If we are going to be pedantic about our measurements, 117.13, 117 is the Hebrew number for this word adieu, which is all majestic and mighty and noble. 1171 is the northernmost limit, this place called Baal Gad, which was the northernmost limit in the Promised Land. 11713 is this word Gedel, which means to set up a banner. Now, the tribes of Israel had to each set up this banner and name their tribe. On the South Pole, 6287 has this Hebrew number for the word meaning beauty and give beauty in ashes. So this is the main site. We got 15 of these guys on the wall, and one of them's wearing a hat. Okay. So the kneeling Moai, he's over here. He's positioned exactly west. Unfortunately, when you look at Google Earth, people have uploaded images to the wrong locations. So if you click on the images for that location, you're getting all the images from everywhere else, but not specifically where you want to go. However, some of them are correct. This guy, this guy here, he's up this mountain. So let's consider these 15. Why is there 15 on this wall or this podium? Now, 15, when Moses reaches the end of his journey and he reaches Mount Nebo, he is with Joshua and Caleb. So that's 3 of them, plus the 12 spies, totaling up to 15. 15 also appears to me as the beginning of the story, the transition in the middle, and the end. It all starts with 15, 15, 15. In Deuteronomy 10:5, this is the passage where, put the tablets in the ark which I have made. Now the 15-degree forward angle, this diagram here does not belong to me. It's copied it off the internet. Some people have been over there recently and studied these, and all that came back was this information, which is good because I can use it. So we have to tilt the body 15 degrees forward to lock the hat on. Why is that? What I ask myself is how much of a earthquake how much of a shaking would you have to apply to knock the hat off? And to calculate that, you would calculate the lateral sideways acceleration, and it's measured in milli-G. So when you're at this angle of 15 degrees, you come out with 268 milli-G. And that can be very easily rounded to 27. So we got these two numbers again, 15 and 27. Now, the Richter scale for that measurement comes out at M6. So it's 6 on the Richter scale you would need to knock off the hat. And that aligns with the 6 handbreadths short cubit measurement. Now, in passages in the Bible that sum up to 15, there it speaks of stand firm and standing strong and standing and cannot be shaken. When we consider the 27, all passages that are chapter 2, verse 7, again, speaks of walking through the great wilderness, 40 years the Lord thy God hath been with thee. Other passages like, shall I go to thee a nurse of the Hebrew woman? So it's all about receiving a mediator of the law. In Romans 2 verse 7 it speaks of an altar of burnt offering. Where passages in the Bible sum up to 27, there it says, fear ye not, stand still. And this one here, lest ye forget the covenant of the Lord your God. So it's all about in your heart, standing firm and being with God. Therefore I shall not slide. In Psalm 26:1, which sums to 27. Psalm 24:3, which sums to 27. There it says, who will stand in his holy place? So the guys that are standing on the walls, these are the Moai. These are the Israelites that made it through to the Promised Land. When a normal Israelite who's not a priest, who's not ordained or anointed by God, he's what's known as a normal Israelite. Okay, he doesn't have the qualification to come up close to the Ark of the Covenant. So Moses, when he lost his hat on Mount Nebo and he becomes a normal Israelite and Joshua takes over, Moses has to then be 2,000 cubits away from the Ark of the Covenant. Now, 2,000 cubits is 964 meters. Now, if we take a look at the map, so if we zoom in down on the spot, so the kneeling Moai, he's over there, exactly there. And here is this row of Moai. Now, if you put your mouse right there and you click on that spot and you right click, you say measure distance, you measure the distance to him, he's 964 meters west. Now, that makes sense because east would be closer to God. So Moses has been reduced down away from God and he's now 2,000 cubits west. Now, if we consider the other measurements of this row of 15 Moai, there is a bottom platform 12 meters wide, and the top platform where they're all standing is 7 meters wide. 7 is a holy number. Now, the length is 220, the inner length is 98, and the whole thing is rotated north of west 30 degrees. Now, in the Bible, when Moses dies at 120 years old, the Israelites mourn for 30 days. And if you calculate the direction here that they're facing a bearing angle of 300 degrees. 300 minus the 180 to say what are their reverse bearing, they're at a back azimuth of 120 degrees. And it's due east 90, backs 120, that calculates to 30 degrees. So the 30 and the 120 both come up in the Bible, in Moses' story. Moses is asked by God to appoint 70 leaders, 70 elders. If we zoom in on this spot where 15 are standing and we right click there, we go measure the distance. So the distance where they're all standing, 70 meters. If we look at the South Pole angle of 63 from Easter Island, 63 is the Hebrew number for the word prophecy. So what is that about? Why prophecy? If you take a look at the chronology of Moses' story from the time of Abraham, Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Levi, Levi had Kohath, Kohath had Abram, and Amram had Moses. Now, why is that? What's that got to do with the 63? He's 6 generations from Abraham to Moses. Now, Jacob is running away from some people, and he's tired, and he rests his head on a stone pillar below, and he has this vision, this prophecy of God extending this ladder down from heaven, gifting man with the law and the 10 commandments. So he sees this vision of the future of Moses receiving the law from God. Now, ladder in Hebrew and Mount Sinai is both this number, 130. So I found 130 meters in 2 of the sites, and 53 is stone and pillow. You can also find that in the measurements. And 220, you can also find that in the measurements, is cushion or pillow, which Jacob put his head against. If we measure the perimeter of the podium, we get to 42 rods. So 42 is the journey stations that they travel through the wilderness. And if you double that, 84 has this meaning where see but not enter. That's what's God's commandment to Moses, that when he gets to Mount Nebo, he can see, but he must not enter. And then we get the lower podium, 39, which brings us to this passage, Numbers 27:12. Then the Lord said to Moses, go up this mountain. So it has this theme of ascending and seeing. We also have this measurement here of 12 meters matching the 12 pillars that God set up to represent the 12 tribes. We also have in Exodus 15:27, there it speaks of 12 springs and 70 palm trees. So here, 15, the 27, the 12, and the 70 palm trees, these measurements are all found in the site measurements. Now, the 7-meter wide platform, there was a 7-day waiting period. So on the 7th day, the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. So do you see now how the dimensions and the measurements of this podium with 15 Moai standing on top of it can bring us to not one single story or theme, but multiple. It's multi-layered. Each of these sites are multi-layered. That's what I'm trying to show you here. Now, the 220, we found that that is the Hebrew number for the word pillow, cushion that Jacob rested his head against. But 220 meters is also 120 fathoms. Now, what is a fathom? Fathom, cables, leagues, nautical miles, these are all units of measure that a shipman would use. And it's funny how this island is out where a person on a ship, a captain, would discover. But when we use seafaring units of measure, that's when this whole study becomes a little unique. 220 meters is also 0.118 nautical miles. Now, why is that interesting? Because 118. If you go and speak to a scientist or an engineer and ask them what is a good number to describe gold, they'll all tell you, 79. Why? Because that's just how we've arranged our periodic table. But if you ask me, I would say, no. 118 is a better number to describe gold. Why is that? Because it is the high ratio of neutrons to protons that cause the stability within the isotope. So it's all about bringing stability. That's what gold does. Stable bringer. 79 plus 118. 79 is the number of protons, the positively charged protons inside the nucleus, inside the atom of gold. And that sums up to 197. Now, that's an interesting number because if you measure the number of the gaps, if you measure the gaps between the 15 Moai, it's 70 meters across. And if you divide that by the 14 intervals, you get 5 meters. 5 meters is 197 inches. So what I'm trying to show you here is that the dimensions of this podium, it also brings us to the idea of gold. But why is that? Well, gold is seen in two stories. Gold is placed inside the Ark of the Covenant, and gold is also this metal that apparently they worshipped, made a golden calf and started worshipping it. What a stupid thing to do. But anyway, that's what they did. If we go across to Uganda in Africa, see this location here somewhere. Where is it? Up here. Up here somewhere. There is this spot. Now, if you drill a hole through this location, in Uganda, just a few years ago, they discovered 31 million tons of gold ore. That's interesting because if you draw a line between Easter Island and this place, Karamojo, where 31 million tons of gold was discovered, look at the distance, 11886 kilometers, matching the 118 neutrons in golds, and we also have the 79 matches the outside circumference length, 79 million cubits. So we also have some other interesting numbers here, like from meridian 0 we have a shortwave separation of 144 degrees, 144 degrees. So let's make sense of it. 118, this is seen in numerous passages where it speaks of gold and silver, and if you draw meaning out of it, gold cannot redeem. Gold cannot deliver in the day of judgment. 42, there is 42.24 degrees if you measure the antipodal complement central angle. You get 42. Now that matches Zechariah 4:2, where it speaks of, behold, the candlestick of all gold, and speaks of the 7 lamps. 137.75 degrees brings us out to these passages, Genesis 13:8 and 13:7, where it speaks of Moses later leads a much larger covenant household through a wilderness where separation becomes essential. Now, separation from Egypt's ways of slavery and idolatry was the idea of the separation. And 144 is 12 times 12. So Moses organizes these 12 tribes around the sanctuary. A sum here brings us to 47. And in 2 Chronicles 4:7, there it speaks of candlesticks of gold. And 31 measurement brings us out to Daniel 3 verse 1, where it again speaks of gold and from Greenwich Meridian. 35, then Chronicles 3:5 speaks of fine gold. The atomic number of gold. 138 in Zechariah 13:8, gold is tried. So in Deuteronomy 2 verse 14, so Moses and Israel, 38 years is the reinforced the Egypt generation passes, and new generation is formed to enter. So we have an alignment here for with God nothing shall be impossible. If you have a look at this short way, not the 79, not the outside, but the inside, between Easter Island and Karamojo in Uganda, we get 15,317 kilometers. That's an interesting number, because if you convert that to Becca, now Becca, shekels, talents, these are all different monies that they used to use in the Bible. To convert to Becca, you would divide by 5.7. When we do that, we get 2658. Now, the 2658th passage in the Bible is this one, where it speaks of the tabernacle and the gold accounting. Okay, so let's cast our mind back on the story of Moses. Now, one of the final main parts of the journey, so the journey of the spies, the Israelite spies, is 240 kilometers. Now, that just so happens to be 150 miles. There's the number 15 again. Now, 240 times 15 is 3,600. Why is 3,600 important? If we strike a pole through Easter Island, through the center of the Earth, all the way through the Earth, where does it come out on the other side? It's known as the antipodal location. So here it is. If you strike a pole through the Earth, through the center of the Earth, where does it come out? I'll tell you where it comes out. You see this little green flag, northern part of India. That's where it comes out. Now, why is that important? Okay, so here is Mount Sinai. So this is Mount Sinai, and this is the antipodal location. If you right-click, if you click and you right-click, you measure distance, and you go to Mount Sinai, that is 3,600 kilometers. Now, 3,600, this measurement here, when you look at that passage of the Bible, it's Joshua 12:24. Now, there it speaks of 31 kings. Joshua immediately defeated, when he took over from Moses, went into the promised land, they immediately defeated 31 kings. And 12 and 24 is 36. Now let's take a look at this kneeling Moai. He's halfway up this volcano, on his knees looking up. Now officially, UNESCO have recorded the bearing angle that he's facing, and apparently he's facing at exactly 327 degrees, somewhere around there. Now in Deuteronomy 3 verse 27, there it speaks of lift up thy eyes westward, northward, southwards and eastwards. Now that's odd, because all the Moai standing on the walls, they're all facing inward, That draws a parallel to that passage. The connection to 327, this northward direction of Moses, looked to see the heart of the promised land. And 325, it says, please let me go to see the good land to the Jordan. So this is where Moses gets on his knees and he begs God. He says, God, I know I shouldn't have struck the rock in anger, but can I go to the promised land? Now, at this stage, Moses is 120 years old. He's been through so much. He started his 40-year wilderness journey at the age of 80. So you must say, this guy's been through quite a lot. I wouldn't put him through anymore. In Exodus 34:8, there it speaks of Moses bowed down to the ground. It's all about kneeling and bowing. If you start to measure the bearing angle of his location to the other location, and we also look at our facing azimuth. In other words, if the direction he's facing, and then you look at the directions of the others that are facing, they have a facing difference. The distances and the bearing angles from, I call him the anchor, because when we start to measure the distances between him and all the other sites, this is where it starts to make sense. There is, if you measure the distances, so this is Moses kneeling, And if you measure the distances to all the other locations, we do immediately have, from those measurements, from those distances, this idea of the oasis and green provision and fresh fruit and the law and perish and wander and the end and wandering and the oasis. So we have this theme going on of the different sites and how they draw parallel to the story of Moses in the Bible. Let's take a look at the other site now. So this site here, so this site is up here, somewhere here. So we can zoom in. So you see there's a nice little beach. This looks like a really beautiful beach. I'd love to go there. Anyway, let's drop a man down here, see what we can see. Alright, so there's this lovely beach, and here are the Moai standing up there, and you can see they're facing away from us. I think you can drive around here. So here these guys are standing on a raised platform. I wish I had the dimensions of how high this is. Do you see how the first platform, there's one missing, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 with hats, and then 3 without a hat. So 4 and 3, 7, and one's missing. And they're also facing a bearing angle of 18 degrees. Just have a look at that quickly. Do you see how they are rotated? So they're almost facing directly south, but they're rotated. If you measure that angle, it's 18 degrees. Now, in Exodus 18:18, there it speaks of being thyself alone, alone. So there you can see the first platform is alone. Doesn't have anybody on it. Now, when Moses is planning his exit, he appoints 4 rulers. One of the thousands, one of the hundreds, one of 50s, and one of 10s. When you measure some other measurements here of the size of the perimeter of the podium and this distance, the distance to the anchor, to the kneeling Moai between him and him is 6.75 kilometers. Now that's a very interesting number because 675 kilometers is 3.64 or 364. That is the solar calendar in nautical miles. In common cubits, it's 14762. 147 was the lifespan of Jacob. In rods, 1342 is the total verse count in the book of Genesis. 12890 is the perimeter of the Levite camp. Now think of the tabernacle instructions by God and setting up this altar of incense where, I don't know, makes the place smell nice. When we measure the perimeter, it's 57 meters. 57 is altar, the Hebrew number for altar. We also have a surface area here of 700 square feet. 700 relates to an ark vessel of preservation. You may look at it like Moses' ark as a vessel of covenant command. We also have in acres a surface area of 0.01606. Now why is 1606 interesting? Because that is the sum of 1342 and 264. 264 is the Hebrew number for the word Jordan. Jordan is the river Jordan in the promised land that we're all heading to. We take a look at the next podium. Here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 of these guys and they're almost facing directly east. Now, there is this passage where 7 lamps thereof may give light. It's all about knowing the way and walking in the way of the Lord and the truth and the light. The orientation is almost 90 degrees bearing facing east. So it's actually, if you measure it, it's about 4 degrees. I measure that angle to be about 4 degrees. 4 degrees is 1.5. Again, we have this 15 number show up in radians. The Hebrew number for the ark is 727. Now, the other site we just looked at is 7,277 meters, matching the ark 727. So let's have a look at Tahai. Now this guy here, there is these 3 podiums here. Do you see how they're all facing a direction? Now if you draw a line in each of their center point directions, it comes out to like here somewhere. Now, when you measure that, you got a focal distance of 130 meters. So there we have this number 1660 come up. That's the surface area of the triangulated area. we have a wall focus of 60 meters and 60 meters. To cut a long story short, when we put this together, it brings us out to these passages where 100 cubits and 5 cubits height, matching the Ark of the Covenants. So the length of the court in the tabernacles, 100 cubits, and a height of 5 cubits. And in the middle bar, and thou shalt make the boards for the tabernacle, and blow an alarm the second time, shall take you their journey. Podium here, literally these Moai are blown off face down. You can see they're face down, they're smashed, they're blown off the wall, the podium. So they were going to the promised land, they had authority, but they lost it. So who was this? Why? I found that there's the story with 3 leaders. Okay, the princes of assembly. There's the Korah, the Levite, and Danoth and Abram, which is the Reubenites. So the Levite, he sought to overthrow the priesthood, and the Reubenites, that these 2 guys, they sought to reclaim the political leadership that they felt was their tribal birthright. So they were naughty, misbehaved, and got blown away because you do not mess with God. So let's consider now, instead of looking at all these sites and trying to figure them out, I thought maybe it's best to see if we can spell out the whole story as it is in the Bible of Moses' journey through the wilderness. However, when we do that, I found that, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix it, because what we find is that there is a stronger alignment with all the measurements when it comes to, instead of just telling the story, which you still can do, it seems to have this stronger alignment with call of Moses and return of God's people. The deliverance story, as in fighting the evil Pharaoh of Egypt and the plagues and the Passover and all that. And then it has this theme bringing us to the covenant and the rupture and the late order. Okay. And in the next few slides, you're going to see this is how they work, basically. So we have matches here using these methods. There's this guy here. He's called the Emi Moai. Now, there's a sculpture of 2 faces, and the top face, they both have their tongues extended. So what is this thing about 2 people and tongues? Okay, well, when God is speaking to Moses, Moses says to God, maybe you should find somebody else, because I'm really not good with people. I don't have a sharp tongue. I'm a bit slow of speech. He says here, I am slow of speech and tongue. So God says, let Aaron do the speaking for you. I'll put words in his mouth. Okay, well, you speak to him, put the words in his mouth, and he will speak to the people. So Aaron, Moses' brother, becomes a big part of the story, because he also has a magic rod and argues with this Pharaoh. So Moses and Aaron is a big part of the story. Cast your mind right back to the very beginning of Moses' life and story, where Moses is a baby, and he's put in this basket and floated down the river. Why? Because the evil Pharaoh of Egypt is murdering all the boys, because he doesn't want anybody to challenge him. So Moses' mother puts him in a basket and floats him down the river. Now the Pharaoh's daughter's sister finds him and keeps it a secret where he comes from, and raises him as her very own. Now that part of the story where Moses is drawn out of water, that's what the word Moses means, drawn out of water, which is 345. And this can be found not only with the South Pole, but also with measurements between the sites. So as we go through these next few slides, when you see this block, this is how the measurements are. There's just too many for me to actually go through and name, but anyway, it's here in this block. 80 years later, Moses finds the burning bush. The burning bush can be found in many of the measurements here, between the sites and the bearing angles. Moses at one stage asks God for a name because he wants to tell the Israelites who sent him. So the name Moses gives him is, I am who I am, or I am who I will be. Now, I am is the Hebrew number reverse 345, it's 543. What I found interesting is that 543 plus 345 is 888. And 888, we're going to see it come up in relation to the foundation stone in Israel. So anyway, for the time being, this passage and the meaning lines up with these measurements. Now, the measurements or the numbers for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, both in Strong's and Hebrew gematria, because Hebrew has two different ways to find the number that matches a word or a meaning or a name. And you come out with these numbers here: 248, 208, 182, 85, 3327, 3290, 216, and 2722 and 216. This is Horeb. Horeb is a mountain that Moses made a journey to. And this can all be found using these measurements between the sites. Now, the burning bush. There's this place up in Turkey, and it forms a 8,008 kilometer perimeter with the antipodal location of Easter Island, which is northern India. If we measure that 3,600 and we triangulate it with the burning bush. Now, why in Yanar? Let's take a look at this location here. In Turkey, there is this location. In Turkey, up here. Okay, it's over here. It's called Yanar. Yanar. And there is this underground gas that comes up, and this area is just constantly burning. There is this burning bush idea of a constant burning, and nobody can put the fires out because the brush here, it soaks up this gas and it's ignited and just constantly burns. If we draw a line from Easter Island to that location through the earth and we measure its distance, look at the angles, we get this 10.9. So there's the 109 again, burning bush location or theme. When we measure the angle between Easter Island and that place Yanar with the center of the earth, it is 158.2 degrees. The 1582nd verse in the Bible is this one, Exodus 3:2, where it speaks of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire. If we measure the arc as a percentage of the earth's circumference, it's 32.535%. Now that is a direct match with Exodus 3:2. If we measure the long way surface arc in fathoms, it's 12,268,310 fathoms, as in seafaring units. And there in Mark 12:26, there it speaks of, have ye not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him? And the arc short way of 2,744 nautical miles, if you convert that to miles, 3157. Exodus 3 verse 15, there it speaks, have sent me unto you. Now what I've also done is measure the angular from the center of the earth to these locations. So this location here between Yanar and Mount Sinai is 18 to overcome sin and Satan and evil. And the 32, again, matches Exodus 3:2. And this length here is 22 degrees. So what does this have a meaning? And it brings us out to this governance established before law is sustained. We have the covenant's justice code. We have the Sinai crisis in the burning bush. And then we have God's name question at the bush. 313. That is a total bearing angle from all the sites. And also remember the total distance is 8,008 kilometers. And we're going to look at this number again. It comes up again, so I'll leave it for later. 888 and 88 also brings us to the alignment of the Ark of the Covenant. Now let's think of Moses' rod. Moses is given this rod of power. And so is Aaron. Aaron's rod is also has this power against the Pharaoh. So it's a sign of authority, the rod in Moses. Now, rod in Hebrew is 54. And 54 is a predominant measurement that we can find. And rock, as in the foundation stone, is 296. And that again can be found when you measure the distances. Now, that foundation stone we're going to come back and have a look at a bit later. Now, there is this Passover meal, and they must all mark their doors with the blood of the lamb so that God doesn't take the firstborn of the Pharaoh. And that's captured in Exodus 12:13. When I see blood, I will pass over you. So these passages again can bring us out with these measurements. Now there is the departure on the 15th day. The departure begins. Pito Kura, a triangle at two sides in reeds, is 49. Now there is this pillar of fire that leads the Israelites in the story during the night, and in the day there is this cloud pillar during the day to lead the Israelites. So there's two pillars, a pillar for the day and a pillar for the night. If you take pillar in Hebrew is 1110 and fire 337 sums up to 447. You can measure the distance between Akivi, which is actually down here, and the anchor point, which is 4.47 statuate leagues, seafaring units of measure. We also have this day and night. We have a 12-hour day and a 12-hour night, summing to 24. And this can be found in these measurements. The back azimuth of the site at Tongariki. We have some other measurements here which bring us to the 42 degrees, which is a direction. Some alignments here for the pillar by day, and then we have some alignments with the pillar at night between the measurements and the site around Easter Island. So there's the pillar that leads them forward, and these are all found with these measurements. The story where Moses parts the sea. Here, if you measure these measurements around Easter Island, it brings us out to this passage where the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and the waters were divided. If you ever heard of the songs of Moses, the Song of Moses, what it's about is Moses sings two songs. He sings a song when he parts the sea and gets the Israelites across the sea. And then he sings a song when he gets on his knees and asks God to let him to the promised land. When the Israelites are delivered and Joshua to the promised land, Moses sings the second song. So there's these two songs for two major parts of the journey. And that can be found here, and you can find these measurements between these sites. Now think of the manna. The manna is what fed the Israelites during this 40 years of wilderness journey. Manna in Greek, Strong's, is G3131, and if you measure the distance between the kneeling Moai, Tukuruti, and Papa Takina, it is exactly 31,310 feet. In Exodus 16:15, this says, "This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat." Now you can find this measurement, 16150 yards, is the distance between Okeke and Akivi. There's also a calculation which we can get to this passage with this number plus 627 minus 4 brings us out to exactly that. And this is how you can get to those measurements. What I found though, because 90 is the number, Hebrew number for the word manna. Manna is 90. So that made me think, how many of these sites around Easter Island are sitting at 90 degrees to each other? And very quickly I found that 6 of them do. And why 6? The manna they had to eat and collect for 6 days, but not the 7th. So let's take a look at the first triangle which I found now. The triangle, it's not just the 90-degree angle that the sites are sitting in relation to each other, but it's also the full triangle that you can measure. And when you measure the sides of the triangle, they bring us out to exactly 150 yards. And there's a semi-perimeter and a corner angle. There's also the longest side here is 80 cables. 80, again, is 40 plus 40. This triangle number 2 has these dimensions. You see its perimeter is 26,000. 26 is God's name of mercy. When you're speaking of God in a merciful way, 26 is Yahweh. And we have some other interesting measurements here of 42 furlongs. So again, 42 comes up in another measurement here. Triangle number 3 brings us out to this measurement. One of the angles is 48. Now, it's 48 palms around the perimeter of the Ark of the Covenant. If you calculate the 2.5 plus 1.5 is 8 cubits. 8 times 6 is 48. There is your hand, you could put 48 of your hand widths around the perimeter of the Ark of the Covenant. It also calculates a perimeter of 12,000. The perimeter of this triangle is 12,000. Now, triangle number 4 I find the most interesting because these distances is 57 over 34. Now, 57 over 34 is 5:3 ratio, which matches the Ark of the Covenant directly. Triangle number 5 has this 40, 50, and 90, bringing us out to the sanctuary materials. Then triangle number 6, the last one. This one has, again, some more interesting values of a total sea perimeter of 14 nautical miles. So we have 4 plus 4 and 6. So you could look at it like the 6 days of manna collection plus the 40 days and 40 nights that Moses spent on Mount Sinai. We also have a 42 angle with Papavaka and how it matches the 42 journey through the wilderness. So this is a little I've tried to give you a visual depiction of each of these triangles and what they're saying. So we have the first triangle like a wilderness entrance, the second triangle an order before provision, and then we have the tribal camp, and then the triangle 4, the holy center. And then we have the 5th triangle, which is all about departure and the sacred rest and the tabernacle. And triangle 6 is the double manna. When we take a look at the whole system, we find that it has all the triangles have a 120 kilometer distance, matching the 120 years old of Moses' life. I also found that 601 is a measurement we can find here, and the Greek number 601 is to reveal, to uncover a secret, and that's what's being revealed to you today. If you take a look at the back of one of these Moai, you can see that there's these two, they look like tennis rackets. I call them tennis rackets. But in the old days, the Israelites, they used to sift wheat. And to sift wheat in the old days, they didn't have grinding and machine tools that we have today. Back then, they had to, can you imagine one of these tennis rackets in each of your hands, and you bounce between the two surfaces the wheat. And what it does is it knocks off the rough edge that you don't eat. So it's a way of cleaning the wheat. It's called a winnowing tool. And some of these other images we see of this great big ibis bird, this bird man. And in Egypt, there is this Thoth, which some people relate to Moses. And it very well could be. I totally agree with them, because the ibis, what the ibis bird is very good for is killing snakes. These birds are snake killers. And here you can see this one here, he's grabbing some manna with his great big claw. There's a part in the Moses story where they all start complaining and moaning to Moses and Aaron. So there's this murmur in the wilderness. Now that's captured in Exodus 16:2, and 162 is the azimuth facing from now direction. In the story of Moses, the people are thirsty and they complain to Moses. They say, why have you brought us out here in the desert to die? Where's the water? How are we going to drink? So God instructs Moses to strike a rock and out bursts fresh, clean drinking water. So this brings us to this theme here of Easter Island and its fresh water. And this is captured in Exodus 17:6. 17 plus 6 is 23, and 23 can be found between the measurements quite predominantly, and 296, which means rock. Now, Moses does it again later, because they get thirsty again. How dare they? But anyway, there's the second strike of Moses, and that's captured in Numbers 20, verse 11. 20 and 11 is 31. 31 is the North Pole angle, although it can be found at the site measurements. But this is where Moses strikes the rock for the second time. Then there is this great battle that they had, and all Moses needed to do was raise his hands and raise the rod, and their people, God's people, will win the battle. So Amalek helps him raise his hands, and rod which he raises is 54. And there again, site measurements are demonstrating this. Now, there is this whole 42 stations during the wilderness journey. 42 stations. And in the passage numbers 33:1 can be found. 42 can be found in the distances between the sites. But what I've done, I'm never satisfied with that. So what I've done is I've listed out the names of each of the 42 stations. It's all named in the book of Numbers, chapter 33. And if you look up the Hebrew number, you get these numbers. So there's the first 7 station stops. There's the next 7. And this is how you can find the measurements between the sites. The next 7, up to 35. You see how we're using chains and rods, hands, spans. Okay, so that is all 42. So I have managed to find all 42 station names between the measurements between the sites. I think that's quite impressive. Now think of the great big Exodus. So the arrival at Mount Sinai brings us to these passages here in Exodus 19:12. So because the Lord descended on Mount Sinai with smoke and fire, this is what brings the hot, burnt, black, cooked theme to the Moai of Easter Island. Sinai and fire comes with these passages here in Exodus. And these are the ways you can find these passages. We also have 2 Hebrew meanings here. 130 reeds. 130 as in Sinai we can find several different ways. Then we have the covenant side of the story, which can also be found with plagues and Passover, sea, telling Moses what to write and creating the second set of 10 commandments. Those key passages can be found with these measurements, as in the chapter and verse sums, as well as the 2525th passage in the Bible. Brings us to Exodus 34:28. Now, let's consider this story with God's finger writing the commandments, writing the law on the 2 stone tablets. Now, in Namibia, there is this finger of God sculpture, where the mountain has been eroded and it's left behind this finger in the sky. And it's fallen down now. It fell down on the 7th of December. I forgot the year. Nevertheless, this used to be called God's finger. So let's do a measurement check to see from Easter Island to the finger of God. This is Mcstafford in Namibia, in southwest Africa. And again, we have some very interesting measurements. I find this measurement here of 894 nautical miles. Now, it is Exodus 8:19, where it speaks of, this is the finger of God. 8,194th passage in the Bible is this one. He shall build a house for my name. Then the inner angle is 107. You may say, oh, that's the number of the beast. Well, that would be smart. But here it refers to the destruction of Egypt. And Psalm 107:4, the wandering in the wilderness. Let them forth by the right way. Then when we have a look at, so AB, it's this outer, so the circumference distance on the outside of the earth is 6,427 nautical miles. In Psalm 64:7, there it says, but shall God shoot at them with an arrow, suddenly shall they be wounded. So it's all about the divine intervention against hidden evil. Then we have a measurement here of an antipode meridian percent of 55.05%. And Isaiah 55 is where God says, I will make an everlasting covenant with you. Now this guy here, he's so hot in the face, he is cooked. And he has white eyes. Now it's a very old tradition to know that you are considered very healthy if your eyes are very white. If you come into contact with God, will your eyes not be white? Of course they will be. Now Moses comes into contact with God when he gives him the 10 commandments. It's captured in these passages, like Exodus 34:29, which sums to 63. The skin of his face has shone. And this one, the skin of his face shone. And this one, put a veil on his face to cover. Moses was glowing and the people were very afraid of him. So he wore this veil to hide the fact that he was glowing so that the people wouldn't be afraid of him. And this one, put the veil on his face again. So these passages here, they sum to these measurements, and we can find these measurements in the site. Now, I do not have the location of this guy, which is unfortunate. I've looked, but I cannot check, find, and confirm the location. There is apparently a location, but I've looked in that area and I cannot find him, so I have not used the location at all for any of the measurements. These measurements here are, you can see, between other sites, not this guy. And there is also a moon supplementary angle of 63 degrees. And if we look at the South Pole angle, it matches 63. Now, when Moses sets up 12 pillars to represent each tribe, we have these passages here. And again, they can all be found with the measurements of the site. As in the Tongaraki upper deck, there is one area where there are 70 hats. This Puna Pau count of 70 hats, and it refers to the 70 elders. I will play for you this little video
about the history, technology, and their art. One of these top knots weigh about
5 to 12 and 14
tons each.
Once in here,
Now look at the weight. The weight is 5, 12, and 20 tons. Now 12 would obviously draw parallel with the 12 tribes.
are more because they're half finished.
So again, we have elders, pillars, and 40 days. And this can all be found by means of these measurements, distances between the sites. And Exodus 24:12 can be summed to 36. And the 42 can be found using the perimeter of the Tahai triangle. Then there's the covenant frame that brings together the 70 elders, the 12 pillars, and the 10 commandments. All these measurements, again, can be found between the sites, distances, and measurements. Then we have how the people gather to Aaron, Moses' brother. So again, these passages can be aligned and brought together with the measurements of the site. Now, Moses receives 2 new commandments and tablets. And the first set of tablets was broken because why? They're all worshipping this stupid golden calf. So Moses gets so angry because he's only just received the commandments and already the people are being stupid, not listening and doing their own thing. So the golden calf is 122, and it is 122 yards between the Akivi, lower podium, diagonal and yards. And the distance between the anchor, the kneeling Moai, and Nao. Some more measurements, bringing us to Exodus 32:4, about the golden calf. Now Moses breaks the tablets. Okay. And there Moses breaking the tablets. How the passages can be found and aligned using the site's measurements. Now, in relation to the broken tablets, if you draw a line from Easter Island to the center of the earth, and instead of going straight through, what you want to do is turn west 60 degrees. Where do you come out? I'll tell you where you come out. You come out in France, at a place called Loch Miriquer in France. And what do you find there? Broken tablet in 4 places. Now this giant tablet, broken into 4 pieces, if it has this little area where you can go inside, this little like tomb that's been found there. And when you have a look, you can see there's a hand that looks like a hand and is being placed on it 10 commandments, or 2 stone tablets, or looks like 2 scrolls, or something like that. Now inside this tomb there is this little engraving of the stone, and unfortunately I don't have a clear image, but you can see it looks like there's 28 on this side of these little stone tablets, and 28 on one side and 28 on the other. Now 28 and 28 is 56. Exodus 5:6, this is the passage where the Pharaoh denies God, and the whole story starts to wind down from that moment. And you see inside there is this little U shape with 2 hooks on the end. That's denoting that something's heavy. Now when Moses was given the 10 commandments, they were heavy and he struggled to carry them down. So it's depicting something heavy. Now there's another place near France in Corbara monolith in Corsica, France. This pillar is facing exactly east. And look at the measurements. It has an initial bearing of 109 degrees between this part and Jerusalem. There's a surface path percent of 7%, a holy number. Then we have some other interesting measurements. 21 common cubits, which is 3/7. We have a measurement of the base circumference is 18 royal cubits, 18 to overcome sin and Satan. We have 4,000 cubic feet if you calculate the volume of this stone. It also brings us to 144 cubic yards. And look at that, we have a 117 again in common cubit. We also have a weight of 302,000 kilograms. So the full triune of the 3 shows up there. So what is all this bringing us out to? So again, we have an alignment here of 109, bringing us to this passage of shall break one of these 10 commandments. And the 106, which is Jesus' number. It's all about the truth and the way, and the true way, the true door. And this is the whole reason for the Ark of the Covenant and the 10 Commandments. Now, if you join those 2 places, Loch Miriquer and Corbara, if you join the 2, they calculate to a distance of 9.6988. Now, you could round that to 10 and align it with the 10 Commandments. However, if you are pedantic about the numbers, 969 is refiner. That's somebody who melts metal to refine it, to break it down. And 88 speaks of the visible sea. So together this has a an alignment or a theme. 969, purity and the law inside, and 88 is the extension of the law towards the people. Now, do you see how this line, if you join these two locations, they sort of point towards Mount Sinai? And it doesn't. If you follow this line, it actually misses by exactly 377 kilometers. That is an interesting number. Now, this is the stone. I believe this image is the stone in Loch Merrick. And there you can see a hammer and a golden calf. And a golden calf and a hammer. So to me, this is basically saying, you make it, God will break it. Let's consider the law, intercession, and renewal. Who's on the Lord's side? So this passage in Exodus 32:26-28 brings us to, who's on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me. So these passages can be found using these distances. Now to Akivi in cables, 46 cables, is Levi. Then Moses goes back up to plead for the people and ask God for his mercy. If we reconsider law, intercession, the tent outside the camp, and the renewal, we have these passages, and they again can all be found using these site measurements. Then we have the rupture sequence. So we have Aaron, the golden calf, and judgment in the camp. And two Hebrew words here, 256 and 122, which we've seen before. Then we have a tent which is pitched outside the camp, bringing us to these passages. Now, two new stone tablets are cut and given to Moses. And that's found in this passage. And again, you can find one measurement we have here is the Akivi upper podium, which is 2,500 millimeters. And this passage is the 2,498th passage in the Bible. Then we have merciful and graciousness can be found with these means. The Tahai triangle angle at the third podium is 2,506 arc minutes. And this is the 2,503rd passage in the Bible. Then we have the 10 Commandments are written again. Passages can be found. Again, 2525 reads, is that passage. Then we have words spoken, broken, and written again. If we think of this idea, we have words received, 2 tables broken, words written again. Now let's consider the RongoRongo tablets. These tablets, nobody's ever been able to decode or decipher, and one thing that they've all been convinced about is how these tablets are not meant to be translated. So here we have this one here. Looks like it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. See, a high and holy number, 8. Now in the story, when God gives Moses the commandments, he basically says only his people will understand. You see, in Psalm 147, there it says, he has done this for no other nation. They do not know his laws. So they will not be able to read and understand the 10 commandments, the stone tablets. Only Israel is given the cipher to understand the meaning. Now the tablets were the work of God, writing of God engraved on the tablets. I have managed to obtain the length and width and thickness of these tablets, and I've got 9 listed here because that's the dimensions of that I could find. But I believe there's 12, which would be very much aligned with the 12 tribes. One of them is in the shape of a fish, and Moses' name is drawn out of water. So it draws a parallel with Moses' name. To continue, now we have the ark and the sanctuary pattern. We have the testimony, sanctuary, and the foundations. Again, all the measurements between the sites can be found. Then we have leadership, elders, crown, and burden. This alignment here is bringing us to 12 tons is equal to 400 talents. So there's a weight of this parapuka, estimated mass. So Moses sets up this bronze serpent to heal the people that were getting sick in the tabernacle. And it's found in these passages here. And again, we can find the station number. Here we can find the measurements between the sites. Now Joshua takes over ultimately from Moses. So where Joshua begins to stand out is in these passages. And again, these passages can be found. And Joshua's number is 391. It is 391 chains, seafaring unit of measure, between Akahanga and Te Pito Kura. Then we have the late wilderness. So we have the succession of Joshua, final testing, the bronze serpent, and border judgment. We have this theme going on between the sites' measurements. Then we have a late wilderness part of the story where these measurements will bring us out to. Then we have the broken covenant corridor with these passage alignments and measurements between the sites by summing the chapter and verse numbers up. Then we have a renewal and restoration idea, which again, the passage numbers can be summed to the site's measurements. Now Moses reaches Mount Nebo. So this is a late wilderness and the handover part of the story. How they can be found measuring the distances between the sites. Now volcanoes, what does this have to do? When a volcano erupts, that's the word of God. Now after a long study of the volcanoes, how they are actually bringing us to the story is they measure a speaking in the mount, the renewal, the ark and the new stone tablets. There is an alignment with no other gods before me, the calf and the breach of the law, 40 days on the mount, and covenant mercy. Now, this location here in Israel, it's the only reason it's called the foundation stone. The foundation stone, the only reason why it's famous is because somebody found or noticed that it has a carving, a stone cut carving of exactly 2.5 by 1.5 cubits. So maybe they thought, well, at some point the Ark of the Covenant must have rested here or was placed here or something like that. However, what I've done is I've measured the distance between Easter Island and the foundation stone, and we have these measurements. So we have a cordial distance, a direct distance of 6629 nautical miles. Now 6629 nautical miles is 888 leagues. 88 leagues brings us to, we also, if I bring back your memory to the other 8008, as in the perimeter between Yanar, the burning bush, Sinai, and Easter Island's antipodal location, we also have 8008. So let's see what this brings us to the meaning of. In 1 Kings 8 verse 8, this is where the passage speaks of seen out in the holy place, and it describes the ark being set in the temple, and the staves are the carrying poles of the ark. In 1 Kings 8:9, matching the nautical miles arc difference between the two locations, Easter Island and the foundation stone, here we have an explanation of what goes inside the arc. Now, there is a highest strength pole alignment here, where we have this measurement of 84 million inches. 8.4 is this passage, brought up the ark of the Lord and the tabernacle. We also have a measurement of the South Pole chord of 55, speaking of brought up the ark and the tabernacle. So again, we have numerous alignments to passages of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the 888th verse in the Bible speaks of the inheritance for us in our Father's house. So it's all about God's people receiving the law, abiding by Him, and being gifted by Him. Because God doesn't just expect you to obey Him for no reason. 888, the Greek Strong's number, brings us to this passage here, where in Luke 17:10, where it speaks of we are unprofitable. And the 888th passage in the Bible is Exodus 25:8, where God says, "And let them make me a sanctuary, so that I may dwell among them." The 8,888 passage in the Bible is 1 Chronicles 28:10, where it speaks of the Lord hath chosen thee to build a house for the sanctuary, be strong and do it. Now, Easter Island to Mount Nebo, this is something we also need to take into account. So this is another connecting site that I thought I'd bring into this, because obviously this must be a viable reason to go and have a look. So the distance of 10,313 nautical miles is a very interesting number. So Easter Island to Mount Nebo, the real Mount Nebo overlooking Israel, where Moses ended up. So we have these measurements, Mount Nebo to Easter Island. Now, because it's almost directly opposite side of the earth, the angle at the center of the earth is almost 180. It's 172 if you round. Now that angle, that distance, the surface distance of 10,313 nautical miles is an interesting number, because here's just another slide demonstrating the meaning. And in Numbers 10:33, we have, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them. So again, these measurements are bringing us out directly to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, do you see if you consider the Ark of the Covenant and them ending up in Israel, the promised land, in Exodus 6:8, 10,313, if you divide that by 15, you get 688. And that brings us to Exodus 6:8, where it speaks of bringing you out unto the land of your heritage. Now, when speaking of God's law and God's commandments, we have another alignment, and bringing us to Exodus 20, verse 4, where it speaks of, thou shalt not make any graven image. So if we take that 28 million, if you divide it by 14, it brings us out to this 204 idea. In Exodus 20, verse 4, there it speaks of, do not break the 10 commandments. And we have a measurement here of 2,580 feet. Brings us out to Exodus 25:8, where it speaks again of make me a sanctuary. Consider the tabernacle and the tent. So we have a distance here of 3,437.666 leagues. And that distance brings us to Deuteronomy 34, where it speaks of Moses went up onto Mount Nebo. Now there is a direct alignment with Mount Nebo in the Bible. between Easter Island and Mount Nebo. 3428 also brings us out to this God will sow and with difficulty and redemption. So there's a interesting Hebrew and Greek between this value, 3428. We also have a midpoint latitude of 7.7, bringing us out to an 8 or 7, God's holy number. Now, speaking of God wanted to encourage belief in him. So the Lord went before them. Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. So that is Exodus 13:21, and 13:742 can be found as the perimeter. Then we have, thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come out water. So that's captured in Exodus 17:6. And we have a 16.89 degree measurement here between Easter Island and Mount Nebo. So Moses strikes the rock and out comes water. So this one, Deuteronomy 10:13, brings us out to obedience and the law. That is an azimuth difference measurement multiplied by 60. If we consider that measurement again, 10,313 nautical miles, 688 is that number divided by 15, like the 15 Moai standing on the platform at Tongariki. 688 is this Hebrew word eshpah, and it's a measure of food. Then I found that 333 is 10,313 nautical miles divided by 31, as in the 31 kings that Joshua defeated after taking over from Moses. And we had this measurement of 313 between Easter Island and Mount Nebo. So again, another look at it. The 31, the name, the singular power of God, and 333, it's the Trinity or the ascended masters. Right, Jesus was 33 when he ascended into heaven. So there's this transition. While Moses defeated 2 kings east of the Jordan, it was the defeat of these 31 kings that fulfilled the mission of the entire entering the land. Dividing the total distance to the viewing point by the victory count creates the link between the destination and the effort required to take it. So I find it a very interesting measurement or distance of 10,313. If you take that 10,313 and you divide it by 50, you get 688. Now that is, the radius of the Earth is 6,880 nautical miles. So 688 is 1/10. And to me, that might bring us to the parallelism with 10 Commandments. Or you may say it brings us in parallel with the 100 silver bases of the tabernacle. There was 100 sockets in silver. Silver is all about clear communication. It's the clearing of communication between God and man. That's what the metal silver is designed to reflect. Now, earlier on, we touched on this number, 304. 304 is the total verse count in the Bible. How many letters? There are 304,805 letters in the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses. And we've seen this measurement come up. And I just found it interesting how today just happens to be exactly 304 years plus 10 days as I'm releasing this video. And I just thought that was rather interesting. Now let's take a look at this trumpetfish. The trumpetfish, do you see how it changes color? And to me it looks like a yellow snake. I think this is a tree snake. Fish, the trumpetfish, has some very interesting numbers when you measure it. It has a maximum length of 80 centimeters. It has a head ratio length to its body of 1/12. it has these 24 gill rakers, matching the 24 elders. Then we have a 27, 29. There's these soft rays along its dorsal fin and anal depth range of 3 meters. So this fish doesn't swim too far down. When you take a look at its genetic information, it has 48 standard chromosomes, matching the 48 Levitical cities.
Called chromatophores in their skin. By expanding or contracting these cells, they can produce a range of colors from bright yellow to dark brown. 2. Trumpetfish can swim vertically or horizontally. Unlike most fish, which swim horizontally, trumpetfish are able to swim vertically as well. They can do this by flexing their long, slender bodies in a snake-like motion. This vertical swimming allows them to blend in with
So the color changes, to me, you can match these colors with the colors of snakes. Because why? Moses' rod turned into a snake. Exodus 7:7 there speaks of 80 years, and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to the Pharaoh. So Aaron was Moses' slightly older brother, because Moses was 80 and Aaron was 83. So there we have this 80 centimeter body length of 80 centimeters. And we have a span, and this fin rays brings us out to these passages. An aspect of 119 meters, which is the depth that this fish swims to. And it brings us to Psalm 119, where it's entirely dedicated to the law. Now, when this fish eats, it just suddenly gulps it down. It doesn't eat slowly. It grabs something in its jaw, and it has this 0.17 speed where it just suddenly swallows. Now, 17, it brings us to this quick work of God and light and victory over its prey. Now, this fish, this trumpet fish, it has, believe it or not, but it has the scale count, which doesn't change. They're all born with it and die with it. And it has the scale count of exactly 54. 20 and 1, the snout segments, brings us to Moses striking the rock with the rod in Numbers 20, verse 11. Now, finally, we must measure this presentation and study as a whole. So these are some of the documents. Now, what I've done for this video and this presentation is I have up-revised the BTI test method to revision 3. What I found this time is that there were some arguments with the validation of my conversions and measurements. So we up-revised the test procedure, what it is, believability and truth index. That's what I call it. I call it the BTI test. And I may include the BTI test method in the documents below, so you can take it away and have a look at how we are testing this theory. And I get an 82.3% score. That is very high, because believe me, you can do many alignments and it'll still give you a very low score. This test, this BTI test, it is extremely difficult to get a high score. And I have been struggling to get this score up to 82.3. So far, that's the best I've had. Now, I've taken 2,510 measurements. And it's not 291 slides, it's 290. But anyway, I think it's a good start. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care and look out for the next one.